the body contours become clear. In other words, the shroud itself is a sort of photographic negative, dating from centuries before the invention of photography, before anyone had seen or even imagined what a negative image would look like.
The shroud is something like the corpse in an Agatha Christie mystery. You've got it on your hands. Whether you like it or not, you've got to explain it. If you don't like it, then you have to explain what put the marks there. And remember, not just photographically negative marks, but also the transferred blood stains from the various wounds in this man's body.
Using life-sized photos of the shroud, anatomists reconstructed the face of the figure. He was, they report, 5'11" and weighed 180 pounds. Christian art has always shown nail wounds in the hands of Christ. The shroud, however, seems to indicate blood spurting from the wrist. Pathologists set out to test both versions of a crucifixion. Experimenting with cadavers, they drove nails into the palm and hung the body from a scale. They were surprised to find that flesh in the palm simply tore away, unable to support the weight of the body. Then they experimented with nails through the wrist. Here, the tendons and ligaments could easily support the weight. The shroud image was accurate. Even the U.S. Air Force contributed. Utilizing sophisticated computers which can enhance faint images, scientists produced a three-dimensional portrait of the shroud face. Color of the cloth image is like a scorch, produced by a miraculous burst of heat or radiant energy.
As of the moment, we have to take the word of the experts in physics and related sciences who think the best theory from the electronic experimentation would lead to some type of radiation.
Joe Nickel, an artist and private investigator, claims he can prove the shroud is a fraud.
It's a simple technique using simply hot water and cloth and a low relief or bas relief, which during the 14th century in France were commonplace. Every artist could whip out these bas reliefs for the church architecture. What you do is you mold the cloth while it's hot and while it's wet to the bas relief. And to do this, you begin to use your fingers to press and force the cloth to the features so that it begins to take on the relief of the features. And as you continue to work this, say after you get a good start on it, perhaps every half hour or so as it begins to dry, when you finish, you will have the cloth tightly molded to the bas relief. It will fit it rather like a mask. Since the Gospel of John refers to the burial spices myrrh and aloes, and since aloes has a potent staining property, I decided to try that. I first tried just the aloes, and it's a little too potent, tends to smudge. So if you tone it down with the myrrh, it works beautifully in about a 50-50 mixture, and it does not penetrate the fibers of the cloth, just as the imagery on the shroud does not penetrate the fibers of the cloth. Homemade dauber, cotton, piece of cloth, piece of tape. Just apply it very sparingly, and just very, very lightly begin to stroke down the plaque.
With this experiment, Nickel produced an image of similar color and tone to the face on the shroud. His final test was to subject his image to the process of negative-positive photography.
The results divide into about three categories. Under technique, it allows the artist to view his work as he progresses. It's consistent with the opinions of two official Shroud Commission members that it was an artistic printing technique, probably using a model or molds. And of course, it's consistent with 14th century technology. The pigment is a light brown color, deceptively similar to a scorch. It doesn't penetrate the fiber bundles and doesn't leave brush marks. It doesn't look like a painting. Under imagery, of course, it's a perfect negative produced in an era that had no foreknowledge of photography. You needn't desire a negative image, it simply automatically produces a negative image. Altogether, there are more than 50 points of similarity between this technique and the imagery on the shroud. I think it's conclusive.
This is wrong on at least 24 counts, of which I can mention only a few here. First of all, there were 3,300,000 people at Turin during the exposition. Again and again, people in the crowd commented, "Now I can see forgery is so impossible because these marks themselves are so gaseous, so hard to see." Then we would say, why would any medieval forger put nail wounds here in the wrist, contradicting the medieval tradition that the nail had been in the palm? Still another factor. We must not forget that Dr. Max Fried, the Swiss criminologist, took off the shroud 48 different pollens, microscopically identified, and 13 of them come from plants that are botanically identified, that are indigenous, native, that is, only to ancient Palestine and growing in Israel right now.
In October 1978, a chance arose to resolve this question of forgery. 30 American scientists were given 4 days of uninterrupted access to the shroud. No motion pictures were allowed, but these stills were taken while the scientists were utilizing techniques such as X-ray, infrared, ultraviolet, and minute particle sampling. Their results will certainly generate more controversy. Unfortunately, the one test which could eliminate the possibility of forgery has not been allowed. Radiocarbon measurement could show how old the cloth of the shroud is. The only hitch, you have to burn a piece. In Rome, Contessa Marie Antoinette Nicastro, an advisor to church officials, was shocked by the American scientists' request.
That they asked us to experiment carbon 14.
The Contessa believes the shroud is vitally important to both science and faith, but the permanent loss of such a large sample would be too great a sacrifice. The scientists' request was denied. A solution to this impasse between the church and science was recently proposed by a nuclear physicist from Rochester, Dr. Harry Gove.
The conventional technique would need a piece of cloth about the size of a man's handkerchief, whereas our technique could do it with a single thread about 8 inches long.
Dr. Gove has adapted a nuclear accelerator to date extremely small samples of organic material. He feels he has already proven the accuracy of this technique.
We got a sample of Egyptian mummy cloth, linen cloth, which is similar to the shroud material, and its historical date is known, and it was also dated by the conventional technique, and we measured it, and we got an age of 2,050 years with an error of about plus or minus 80 years, and that agrees with both of the other measurements. So we feel pretty confident we can do it.
Is the shroud 600 years old and therefore a forgery, or 1,900 years old and possibly authentic? Never before have church officials sacrificed even the smallest piece of a holy relic for scientific testing. However, a new wave of open communication is sweeping through the church, led by Pope John Paul II. The ultimate decision to burn a piece of the shroud may rest with this man. The shroud, safely locked away, is once more out of reach. It is not expected to be seen again for at least another generation. Perhaps in the time of our grandchildren, we will discover if the shroud is the burial cloth of Christ.
Can there be scientific tests as for the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ? As for the resurrection, I think we should note that the resurrection of Jesus is a dogma of Christianity that by definition is a miracle and therefore beyond human comprehension. No scientific law could be involved in that case. That is a question of religious faith. As for the crucifixion, however, this is a historical fact subject to our own laws of human life, and therefore the shroud can be used to give us evidence of a crucified Jew 2,000 years ago. And of course, mathematically, this would lead to the identification with Jesus Christ.
The disciple Thomas was the first skeptical scientist. He asked for proof of the resurrection. Jesus obliged, and then reminded him, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed."